This is Michael Black and Beth Bond, and tonight we are hosting Natasha Dyer from the City of Atlanta Mayor's Office of Resilience, who is the recycling coordinator for the City of Atlanta in the Office of Resilience. Natasha?
Great. Yes, like he said, I serve as a senior recycling program coordinator in the Mayor's Office of Resilience, and I focus on food waste and food surplus diversion from the landfill. And so this means I spend a lot of time working on edible food recovery to feed people and working with external collaborators to create and strengthen community-based composting infrastructure so that we can get that inedible food back into our composting systems and then right back into our urban ag systems. So today I've been asked to speak with you all about how food injustice and low-income communities contributes to environmental racism. And maybe environmental racism has been broadly defined for you at the start of the series, but to frame it for our discussion, environmental racism as it applies to food accessibility refers to the way in which neighborhoods, primarily populated by people of color and members of low socioeconomic groups, are burdened with the disproportionate lack of access to healthy, nutritious, and affordable food outlets. The way in which environmental racism is thought of when these communities live close to toxic waste facilities or garbage dumps or other sources of environmental pollution is the same way having no access to healthy food affects the well-being and health of the community, thus lowering the quality of life. So the difference between standard racism, which conjures up images of direct actions by people of a dominant group toward a minority group, with these actions tending to cause immediate physical or emotional harm to that group, environmental racism is a more subtle form as its cause and effects are felt over time. Before we unpack some of the causes of food injustice, let's go over some of the terms that you'll be hearing quite a bit in this presentation. Next slide. So food insecurity. Food insecurity is a household-level economic and social condition of limited or uncertain access to adequate food. And here in Atlanta, about 18% of our population is food insecure in contrast to the national average of about 13%. And so again, that's not homeless population, that's household level. And so that's gonna be your senior citizens or your children or someone that's just in between jobs. So that could very well be your neighbor, right? That could be someone you know that's suffering through this food insecurity. Food deserts are characterized as an urban area in which it is difficult to buy affordable or good quality fresh food because a healthy grocer or supermarket is more than a mile away. Many low-income communities around the country are located in what policymakers, activists, and media refer to as food deserts, or places where there's an abundance of cheap processed food and an absence of healthy, fresh, affordable food. In a food desert, food options range from a variety of fast food chains to what passes as food in local corner and liquor stores. Food injustice. Food injustice is a societal structural problem that prevents access to healthy, nutritious, and culturally appropriate food. Food access can be self-explanatory, but for the sake of this discussion and how we talk about it in our office and in and around our work, good food access is defined by not having to go more than half a mile to find fresh quality, nutritious food, whether a grocery store or a farmer's market. And though we're currently hovering around 70% of fresh food access for the City of Atlanta, and Mayor Bottoms is asking us to raise that to 85% within the next 2 years, just 5 short years ago, that number was only about 50% of the population that actually had access to food within half a mile. Next slide. So how did we get there? How was Atlanta experiencing that as a problem just about 5 years ago, where only half of the population was not close to food? Food injustice is about corporate consolidation of power that has monopolized the agricultural industry and encroached on our food consumption. We need to understand that the demand for big agriculture and fast food did not come from the consumer market. For the past 50 years or so, we have been told that the industrialization of food production gives America the power to feed the world. The justification for taking food production from the farm to the laboratory and from our neighborhoods, which becomes a controlled environment in which our food is grown, manufactured, and prepared, does not work for everyone. The gains of the mass production didn't benefit the good of all and instead only benefited the standard few. So food injustice weakens those at the bottom of the pyramid. Agribusiness and fast food came up with a model based on quantity at the expense of quality intending to entrap those with the least amount of purchasing power. In a market of cash-strapped consumers, the calorie-to-price ratio of fast food versus real food is how choices are made for us. So when forced to choose between a meal that offers 2,000 calories or an apple, which often both cost $1, for someone who lives near poverty line, the choice is simple. You've got to choose what's going to fill you up for that dollar. So food injustice is socially engineered. And some call it living in a food prison even, but it's most generally called a food desert. But living in these food deserts, you don't choose what you put in your body in the proper way. And again, you must choose what's filling, with the outcome of this producing the epidemic of preventable diseases we can see in low-income communities like hypertension, diabetes, obesity, heart disease, premature death, and so on. Next slide. So we will begin to discuss the problem through the lenses of then and now, and kind of where the city's looking to take food access in the future, since we have met some of our goals. So next slide. So this slide shows just what we were working with in 2010. The problem of food deserts in the area was recognized when Atlanta was, I guess the United States Department of Agriculture kind of did a report of many different urban areas, and Atlanta was shown to be that 52% of our residents were characterized as low income. And that's a census tract in which over 50% of residents don't exceed 80% of the median income in the area. And also they were characterized to be in a low food access tract, which means at least 33% of the population is living more than half a mile from a fresh food outlet. This is also referred to a LILA area. We just that's our going acronym, LILA, low income, low access, as well as a food desert, but we tend to call it LILA in our office. These areas touch every council district at the time and every neighborhood planning unit except A and C. And in this map of Atlanta, you can see the expanse of the food insecurity indicated by the yellow areas. Next slide. So the city knew they needed to do something about increasing food access, and one of the solutions was to increase opportunities for urban agriculture to thrive. Next slide. So even though Atlanta's urban agriculture scene was already having successful stories being told by Rashid Nuri, whose organization Truly Living Well was providing a dependable, consistent source of fresh produce and job creation since 2006, and Bill Bowling's Foodwell Alliance, which provides much of the needed capital and technical assistance to sustain urban farms, more was going to be needed if urban ag was to have a fighting chance against the built-in impediments hindering its expansion. So for instance, at the time, farmers often couldn't get business loans to purchase property or equipment or other items needed for a viable business because agriculture was not an approved use of urban zoned land. And similarly, community gardens and urban farms couldn't obtain legal land use agreements to protect their access to land they were using. So eventually, organizations like Atlanta Local Food Initiative, Georgia Organics, the Turner Environmental Law Clinic, and then the then Mayor's Office of Sustainability, which is now our Office of Resilience, to name a few of the organizations, got together to develop what is now the Urban Agriculture Ordinance of 2014. This law officially recognized urban agriculture within city limits, enabled the growing of food on vacant properties, churches, schools, and even blighted parcels owned by the city. The ordinance also designates urban gardens as producers and sellers of local and regional food. So by 2015, city leadership knew it needed a high-level ambassador, so to speak, to create programs of what fresh food access could look like. So to strengthen and begin the work that was outlined in the ordinance, the city created the first ever urban agriculture director position in the United States and hired Mario Cambardella. Mario immediately set out on working on 3 key areas where he thought he could best support urban agriculture. And those were improving local urban food production policies, assisting with brownfield redevelopment, and helping community members seeking to establish and sustain community gardens, farmers markets, and food hubs by streamlining the permitting process. In turn, this was helping to create non-traditional points of fresh food access in low-income, low-access areas or food deserts. And this was very quickly a top 5 initiative for the city. Next slide. Because of this work, along with other investments by other offices coming out of the mayor's office, like Invest Atlanta, that actually work to get actual grocery stores and neighborhood markets built in a few of these food deserts, by 2017, the city of Atlanta updated their food access data to show a decrease in LILA, or low income, low access residents, from 52% to 30%. So this means that since Mario and more investment was put into these areas since 2015, an additional 22% of the population now is within half a mile of fresh food, fresh, affordable food. Next slide. So with this current administration, because that started under the last administration actually, where Mario was brought on, and we kind of did more work to get more food into the area. Under this new administration with Mayor Keisha Lance Bottoms, she's launched a goal to bring access to 85% of Atlanta residents by 2022. And so that would be to reach an additional 15%, or 70,000 people living in these food deserts, and linking them to fresh food within half a mile. Next slide. So what's next? What are we going to do to meet the mayor's goal of increased food access to Atlantans? Next slide. So first, we're going to start with updates to zoning. As urban farming and community gardening are springing up in actual residential areas because of the work of this ordinance, a new unforeseen barrier was lying between getting food from growers to the communities, and that was city zoning codes that don't allow commercial activity in low density residential districts. So now our office is working with the Department of Planning to rewrite zoning to remove these barriers and enabling special permits. With this also comes an update to the Urban Ag Ordinance of 2014 that now allows urban gardens to sell their produce right on site. Like, so if you're growing right there in your backyard or your front yard, they're now looking at being able to allow people to create like something called porch markets. So you can actually grow the food and then get it directly to the people that need it right there in your community. And so the update to the ordinance also eases the permit process to create farmers markets in these non-commercial settings. And so the outcomes will obviously be to the benefits will be to the residents, who will be able to get food right where they need it. There's 18 urban farms in these areas that will benefit from some updates to the ordinance and taking off these zoning restrictions. And it creates a neighborhood scale of economy. As the program continues to be created, there's also talk of waiving fees for those grocery delivery apps like Instacart and just those food apps and things like that, so that people, if they actually utilize those apps, there's talk about waiving the fee in these LILA areas to communities that actually just don't have the access to food. Next slide. Okay, so on December 6th last year, the USDA awarded the City of Atlanta the Local Food Promotion Grant, which is a 3-year, $450,000 grant with us to match it by $150,000. So in total, it's $600,000 grant that gives direct assistance to establish and implement the Atlanta-grown local food promotion program. So the work that will be done over the next 3 years, and I'm working on this project too, will create the Atlanta-grown brand so consumers know that local produce really means local. By developing, improving, and expanding training and technical assistance to local food businesses that process, distribute, aggregate, or store Atlanta-grown produce food products, it will help to develop new market opportunities for socially disadvantaged growers serving Atlanta and food desert areas. It will also continue to push the envelope to create novel, non-traditional points of fresh food access, like the MARTA Market at the West End Transit Station you see in the background of this slide, that helps to fill the gap of Atlantans who live in food deserts while they're on their way and connected to transportation. So a lot more of these kind of MARTA markets are supposed to pop up too, because I mean, it's people, a lot of the problems with getting to food is that people don't have access to transportation. So if you're already on MARTA, why not put some markets there as well? So next slide. And so this is me. This is what I really work on all the time. This is where my heart is. So also on the horizon for expanding fresh food access is introducing food recovery and donation of edible food. Next slide. So this is a fact I like to share just for fun that I'm sure a lot of people know if you're environmentally I don't know, work in the environmental space, a lot of people might know that 40% of edible food is wasted. And so that's food that is watered, grown, and transported to stores, all to end up in the trash. Next slide. And so this is important because just like looking at the facts of hunger in a different light, 1 in 5 children in Georgia is hungry. 1 in 7 adults in Georgia is hungry. And again, that's not your homeless population. We're talking about senior citizens and people in between jobs. And so your friends, your coworkers, people you know are hungry right now. And if we were able to corral all the food that we are wasting that is edible, and not just as a nation, but as a world, it's kind of a universal number, we would be able to feed the world's hungry 4 times over. That's how much food we waste that we're just growing just to throw away. And so, as I'm sure you know, that wreaks havoc on the planet. The nation's annual water usage numbers, 21% of the nation's annual water consumption goes to growing food just to throw into the trash. 10% of the nation's annual energy usage goes into growing food that we just throw in the trash. And when you put any organic waste in the landfill, and of course that includes greenery, tree shrubs, anything that's organic, anything that once breathed, that lived, once it goes into a landfill to decompose, it is decomposing in the absence of oxygen, and that is creating methane, which is a greenhouse gas that is more potent than carbon dioxide, thus accelerating climate change. And so if a landfill or if greenhouse gases from food waste were the size of a country, or the emissions it made were the size of the country, it'd be third to the US and China. Also, the greenhouse gases that food waste creates is equivalent to 37 million cars per year. That's how much it's wreaking on the planet. And also not really more of a household stat. I really want to change this. It's more for like, so if we're looking at commercial sectors that are able to divert edible food and find new recycling methods for that, whether that's feeding people or whether that's getting inedible food to compost, that's then something they're diverting from their from their waste stream, that would make the size of their bin go down, or the frequency of their bin go down. And so that's just saving. So the people, planet, profit aspect of why food waste should come out of landfill. Next slide. So this is another photo for effect from a recent food recovery work I've done to get good edible food into the hands of people who can use it today. So these are perfectly good berries and cheese that are destined for landfill because of sell-by dates of today or a couple days in the future. So now that's not best by dates, because best by dates kind of, I think, they mark the death or the so-called ending of a food, because it's like, it's best by today, throw it away now, right? But sell-by dates would kind of mean like, hey, if you sell me today, or in this scenario, if you give it to someone who needs it today, it should still have a week to go. Because I mean, it's sell me by today, but still stores on those sell by dates, because they don't have any kind of system or method of getting this food into people's hands, it just goes into the trash. And so because they're beholden to their sell by dates, and also because we know 1 out of 6 persons on average is hungry, and the extreme toll agriculture takes on in the environment, it behooves us as a society to begin to create more systems to rescue this food and get it to the local bellies that need it. Next slide. So about 2 years ago, in the summer of 2018, as one of the 100 resilient cities, Atlanta's Mayor's Office of Resilience was awarded a grant through the Rockefeller Foundation to collaborate with NRDC to map the city of Atlanta's wasted food by sector, with the goal of the work being to inform cities on how we can actually increase recovery of edible food to then feed it to people. Next slide. So these were our results that we received last year, 2019. And what you're looking at is about 125,000 tons of food that's ending up in landfills. And just like other cities that NRDC's worked with, I mean, you're seeing Nashville, Denver, New York City here, but I'm sure they've added probably 5 other cities to this. But the point is that it's all kind of universal with the numbers being the same. So residents are the real people that are the real culprit that's wasting food. But and just in this, just talking in this space of recovering food to feed people, that's we're working on trying to figure out how to tackle residential food waste, but as a means to recover it to feed people, because we can't recover from residents, the focus of any recovery work centers is on creating like programs within the other sectors. All those other sectors is who we're working to create programs like grocery stores and restaurants, because they have They'll have foods that are packaged and practices of storing their food that make it more readily accessible to nonprofit agencies and able to be recovered and then distributed to people that need it. So next slide. Okay, yeah. So just to reiterate, Atlanta has a food insecurity of about 18% of the population, and that's much higher than the national average, about 13%. And so that represents a 14 million yearly meal gap. And so as I did this work with NRDC and just kind of what they shot back to us through the numbers just shows if we actually elevated or accelerated recovery work by just 3%. So that means if we captured 3% more of food that's going to the landfill that's edible, we could tap into that that meal gap by 26%, just 3%. And so what if we were, it says the maximum scenario of recoverability. It says if we increase that by 7%, we could more than half obliterate that yearly meal gap. So, I mean, it's just a real story to try to figure out more ways to create systems that get more of this food into local hands or local bellies of people that are hungry. Next slide. Yes, so this is what sprung up from this year or so collaboration. In fact, NRDC's program, its national program, is called Food Matters. So there's a Food Matters Denver, there's a Food Matters Nashville, and so this is Food Matters Atlanta. We all make our own branding. This is the branding I created for Atlanta. And so this is my take on aiming to help the mayor reach her 85% fresh food access goals, because I'll always stand behind, like, we can grow food, but we've just been shown that we're actually wasting a lot of food, and the toll it takes on agriculture and the environment. We should actually be trying to figure out ways to recover food and feed it to people, because it's already here as well. So because this work is also food recovery, at the same time we're working on the food access goals, we're also able to work with the EPA to reach their federal goal of reaching 50% of food waste diversion from landfills by 2030. So basically this program, which only began last fall, aims to engage and challenge all commercial sectors, that are large generators of food waste, to prioritize reduction of food waste, and then where you can't reduce food, to recover it to feed to people, or divert inedible food like plate scrapings at a restaurant, or unavoidable food spoilage, to compost services. And just to be fun, I added a component called regeneration that gives businesses like restaurants the ability to be linked to Georgia Organics Farm to Table program that will get them purchasing their produce and microgreens for their delicious dishes right here from the local urban farmers that are supported by our urban agriculture programs. So all this is a means to stimulate local economy and lessen the miles food travels to get to us, again, helping our environmental impact. Next slide. So this was the initial challenge that just came from this program that just started last fall. I was able to get 6 restaurants to join at Atlanta Airport, and over 3 months they were able to recover 21,000 fine edible meals that we were able to share with various nonprofits around the Atlanta area. So there will be more sector challenges, so we'll actually hit, I've got some grad students working on grocery store studies to figure out why grocery stores aren't doing more recovery. I've also got someone starting next month that'll be working to look into hotels to see why they're not recovering. Because, I mean, if you look around the country, there are different states or cities that have ordinances that already mandate diversion of edible food from landfills. So if Hilton's already has to do it in Los Angeles, why aren't they doing it here? So it's really just a way to kind of start to tap into these sectors to see what the best practices are. Like if they're doing it in New York and they're doing it in LA, why aren't we doing it here? And so we can actually just kind of start to compile some of this information before we kind of try to figure out ways to make them divert this food so that we can actually feed people and then keep it out of landfill. Next slide. Let's see. Okay. So as part of my work when I joined the food access team, let's see. And in staying in line with the vision of creating novel and non-traditional points of fresh food access, one of my deliverables was to do a gap analysis. And so that's to determine the potential of closing the gap between standard food pantries and food banks, and to provide easy access to food to people where they're at. So like maybe housing, or like maybe schools and libraries, and then rec centers. And so I'm really proud to say that, so you can see how I've laid the Lila map over, I guess, the parks map. And that allows me to see where like there are different senior centers and rec centers and that kind of thing that we can actually try to start to create some of these programs, because the Mayor's Office of Constituent Services has a population she feeds, and that's seniors and the senior centers. There's also the Mayor's Office, and they also do the warming centers. So when it gets too cold, during the winter, we open up some of our rec centers so the homeless populations can come in and get a night's sleep so they don't freeze to death. And so that we have to feed them then too. And then there's also the Mayor's Office of Human Services that has a population of after school kids that they have to feed. So the goal and the idea was to start to pump some of this fresh food that's destined for landfill into these areas, because hey, you can eat it now, right? And so that saves the city money if they're not having to then pay money to actually feed these populations that are represented by some of these mayor's offices. So I am proud to say that I was told just before press that I couldn't mention the grocery store's name, the names, the nonprofits, so I took all that out. But we do have a program coming up post-COVID that will start in those highlighted starred little those are rec centers. So C.T. Martin and Pittman Park and Roselle Fan, those are different like I guess rec centers and parks and things like that, where we are working with Life Cycle Building Center, I will say that, to build some of the pantries that will store some of this food, and being able to pump some of this recovered food and actually just some staples that a grocery store can actually give to us and for free into these areas, just to divert food from landfill. So yeah, so that's the work I do. And I'll even say I've been eating the last 2 weeks on recovered food just to take the stigma off. I'm working with a nonprofit that recovers food every Saturday. And I'm spending 60 days just eating really great, fresh, healthy food, just to show that, I mean, there's nothing wrong with it. In fact, that was the picture of all the cheeses and berries. That's the work I've been doing, just working, like, just to show people that there's really quality, expensive food that's going to the trash just because of sell-by dates. And we change that stigma. We can get people to eat more of this food before it goes to the landfill. So there you go. That's how we're working on food access in the city of Atlanta.
Wow, Natasha, what a great, awesome presentation. And thank you for the work, because for those of us who are sustainability geeks and have been around for a while, this shows remarkable progress on the city of Atlanta's behalf, and it's really, really exciting. And it's good to know about all the partners that you're working with. Does anybody have questions? So the raise your hand function's not working. I don't know. That may be something on my end for hosting, but if you have a question, just unmute yourself. We're small enough where you can unmute yourself and ask the question.
Hey, this is Jillian.
Hey, Jillian.
Thanks so much for sharing. Still being new to Atlanta, I geek out over these maps and like love pointing out, like, oh, I can see my like little neighborhood by the Beltline there. I had a couple of questions that were, I guess, just sort of like technical kinds of questions. You used the phrase food prison, and that was actually a new phrase to me. And I was wondering if you could talk more about that, if that is in like a certain kind of landscape, or if it like has to do with a specific type of population. I'm not sure.
And unfortunately, I don't think that's anything we're using at the city. I think I just took it out of an article. I don't know if you've heard of Ron Finley. He's a gangster gardener. He grows food in Los Angeles, right on, I guess, those sidewalk pieces that technically belong to the city but don't. And so I think it's just trying to say that you live in this area where you can't get out. Like there's no way for you to get this food. So it's just another term, I think, for a food desert. But it's just saying like you're locked into the food that is actually in the area that you can get it. If you can only get food in at a liquor store, at a corner store, and that what can they really have that's fresh or nutritious? I mean, it's like actually trying to put that heaviness on and so say you're in a prison. Like what can you eat? So yeah.
Wow. But thank you for sharing that. The other question that I had was, again, like a very technical question, but at the beginning, you defined food deserts as being in urban areas, and just wondering if that was to like highlight that it's here in Atlanta, or if that you found that it only applies to urban areas versus rural.
No, there are definitely rural food deserts. Definitely.
Okay,
So
cool.
for the scope of this, yeah, it's an urban area, but definitely there are food deserts in rural areas.
Cool. Thank you so much.
Yeah.
So I have a question. Michael, if you can get us back to those maps where they were pies and they were showing Atlanta versus Nashville, New York, and Denver. I found that really fascinating. There it was. Fascinating because New York has such a high percentage of food waste from residential.
Yes.
I'm not going to ask you to answer for New York City, but I'm like, my impression of New York, I would think their restaurant waste would be way, way higher. But from a perspective of Atlanta, is the reason we have a high-ish amount of restaurant food waste is because we don't have systems and we don't have the education in Atlanta to let restaurants know what to do with the waste?
Yeah, I think we're at a time with food waste. I think food waste is actually just kind of really, it's kind of brand new. I mean, it's actually just kind of having a time, because I've been to a few conferences and it's like the third or the second one, whereas food waste hasn't, recovering and sharing with people is actually finally at this kind of this cusp or something that's happening. If you look at all the pie charts, that blue area is the restaurants. So the very next sector is always restaurants, whereas the green is the residential and all of them. But in all honesty, I've been working on food waste for maybe 8 years, but it's funny, like I was always focused on composting. So I think there's a way that even when you go into restaurants, they don't think that they're wasting. And even if you go into people's homes, they don't think they're wasting. That's just it. No one thinks they're wasting food because we're all kind of programmed not to, or think that we are. But I mean, every household's wasting about $1,500 a year just on over purchasing, or that food that you bought and kind of brought home from a restaurant you don't eat. So I think food waste has slipped through because it's not as seen. It's not as, people can't see it, but it's happening quite a bit. And I think it's finally having a time where the light is being shown on it. Because like I said, I've been around food waste for maybe 8 years. I wrote my thesis on this and everything. But like, I'm finally realizing that there's an angle to like food recovery and not just kind of recycling it into compost. There's really a whole edible side to it of like feeding people. So I think we're now seeing, not just me, I think it's above my level, but there's now people trying to create systems, whether that's changing the supply chain, because a lot of waste happens in the supply chain, just kind of transport and leaving food on the fields and stuff like that. But I think as you see influx of new like recovery organizations like Gooder or Second Helping, I think there's now this surge. And I think with movies like Wasted, I think people are starting to finally realize that food waste is a thing, like edible food waste. So I think that's all it is I like, personally, I didn't even realize how much edible food waste we're all wasting until maybe 3 years ago. So.
Well, I'm always willing to admit my sin. I tell people I have the healthiest compost pile in the city because it's full of organic fruits and vegetables. So I do, you have best laid intentions. And I have heard some people saying, like in regards to fresh fruits and veggies, if you're not someone who's going to eat them fast enough, that you should consider purchasing frozen food instead, so you can sort of extend the life, or at least freeze those, those vegetables that are freezable so you can extend the life. So I'm curious of what kind of strategy y'all are going to have for the restaurants in regards to what are you going to do to help tackle that 23%?
Yes. So the first challenge is just to connect them with organizations that will pick up the food. Um, how do you, I have ideas and things I wanted. I just never know what I can say, that kind of thing. But it's really just trying to figure out ways to connect them to nonprofits that are collecting the food until you kind of figure out ways to make them do it. Because like I'll just say what other places are doing. Like, so France is I think the first place that actually created an ordinance behind edible food. And it made like grocery stores, starting with grocery stores, it made them have to register with a charity, so that instead, before you put it in the trash, you realize, oh, I'm registered with this charity, they'll come collect it. So I just think little shifts like that, where you before you mandate like registering with a charity, that's why what I've created is kind of challenges where we're going out and showing them how they can either reduce their food waste, how they can recover their food waste, meaning to feed the people, or how they can recycle it. So that was the first challenge. We only got about 6 restaurants in the airport. We're about to go bigger, like citywide, after COVID, because I got like some money from NRDC to kind of create all these restaurant swag informationals. So like there'll be like table tents, because this actually starts to get into the residential population, but there will be table tents that show you why food waste is important, why you shouldn't have it. There'll be like to-go stickers that show you why it's important. And so that will actually get the restaurant to realize too that they should be diverting in the back of the house. But we've been given some money to deploy to actually do some outreach to just residents as well. So it's really just about connecting. I think it's about laws all the time, but it's really just about connecting the commercial sector to these people that will pick up the food for free. I think it's really just about awareness and outreach. That's really what we'll be rolling out over the next year or so. That's why my goal is to get into all of these sectors to show them that they can recover their food through these challenges, through challenging them to sign up with a recovery or a composting, and hopefully creating some type of reward, and in the way getting some funding to create some type of reward.
So am I reading this chart right, that we have 0 food waste from our correctional facilities?
Yeah, it's weird, right? That's what it says.
But sort of yay. I'm like,
yeah,
good job.
that's what it says.
So because the recovery aspect from the restaurants, I mean, to me, it's not even, I always like to go to businesses and not even talk about the environmental. I'm like, y'all just save the greenbacks, right? I mean, come on, then 23%, if whatever percentage, but just say, if you're throwing away 23% of your food, then that's 23% of your profit going down.
Yeah, exactly.
So
yeah,
I want to sorry, go on.
No, go ahead. I mean, because it really is reduce, reuse, recycle. That's really the hierarchy. So we're really supposed to be going in there teaching them to reduce first. That's always the goal.
Right.
But then after that, it's recovery. Yeah.
So I'm always hesitant to sort of date anything that's so awesome like this, because this has been a phenomenal presentation. But I mean, we are in the time of COVID, and Michael and I were actually talking about this afternoon. What are you seeing right now with, first of all, some restaurants are completely closed down, some of them are on limited hours. Like, what's happening right now with food waste?
Well, I know that I'm really close to an organization called Gooder. She's a recovery agency, and I know she's really hit the ground running, where she's been able to create ways that she's collecting food from grocery stores and getting it to people that need it. Something about her just sprung into action, and she's getting food even from like restaurants and grocery stores, and getting it to these neighborhoods, these same Lila areas that need it. I don't know exactly what is going on with the restaurants, because I know that they're able to still sell. They're able to kind of do like curbside pickups. I know a lot of restaurants are doing that, and they're able to sell their liquor right now too. But unfortunately, I don't know exactly what's happening with food waste as of yet. I'll have to figure. I'm sure that those types of reports will come out. But I am sitting on quite a few webinars about food right now. But I'm not sure what the magnitude of the food waste that's going to come out of this will be. The wastage.
Right. Maybe it'll shrink a little bit. I don't know. Okay. Anybody else have questions? I mean, this is what we got her, y'all. Let's take advantage.
Natasha, I think what the city's been doing in terms of reducing the food deserts is fantastic. I wondered if there was data on how people are taking advantage of that new food that's available. So the first thing is to make it available, and then the second thing is to get people to actually go and take advantage of that. Is there data on that in terms of like people increasing their diets or more purchases being made from those local areas?
And forgive me, this is I kind of stood in for the urban ag side. Mario asked me to give this presentation. But what I do know, I can tell you that what is happening that will be in the future when it comes to urban ag and kind of connecting people to their food, that's kind of very exciting, is Georgia Tech is actually creating an app right now, because there are going to be these different types of food access points, like probably in dollar stores, where we're going to start to promote some of this Atlanta grown label food into these new novel areas that we're trying to create. So we're in the midst of creating an app where people are going to be able to scan whatever food they're looking at, because of course we know there's all these studies that show that even if you create the food, do the people know how to come and use it? Or because they've been so used to eating food that's not good for them, do they now know that this good food is what they should be eating? So that's why Mario, before he left, he went a step further to work on this app that should allow people to actually be able to scan the locally grown food. They'll know where it came from. There will be some recipes in there, and it'll just kind of connect them to the food and know that their food is coming right from their neighborhoods. So that's what I do know. Yeah. But I mean, if you want some extra data, I can definitely go to the urban ag department and find some of that stuff.
That'd be cool.
Yeah.
This will also date this recording, but for those who are on, I wanted to make sure you knew that Panther Food Recovery Network, which is a Georgia State student organization, is hosting the Southeast Regional Food Recovery Conference this Saturday. And so I can share information with folks about that later.
Yes, I want to know. Please share.
Natasha, thank you so much for the presentation. I learned so much. Hey, I'm sorry I'm late. I was on another call, but this was amazing, even the parts that I was able to catch.
Oh, great.
I think it's so critical to get some of this food recovery into the hands of residents who are in food deserts and can't afford to actually get fresh produce in those neighborhoods. You know, my neighborhood's just like that, so I definitely appreciate these efforts. I guess my question is, for people who can afford to buy groceries and who can afford to put some money towards this for a regular run, I would love to be supporting initiatives like the ugly fruit or just recently expired food, and still paying for it and supporting this ecosystem somehow so that it could fund more of the nonprofit side. Are there efforts to do stuff like that in Atlanta right now, or how do we get involved?
Well, there is one of the, on that last slide, there's you all know True Living Well. They are going to be joining this food recovery effort. They're one of the collaborators that's going to actually be, they have like a mobile truck where they're going to be able to go into some of these areas and sell their produce for people that actually can buy some of it. And then they will also be getting some of the staples from Kroger to put into this. It's just going to be in Winnebago, where they're going to have a mobile truck that goes through these Lila areas that don't have grocery stores and selling, like, you know, like the ice cream truck comes down and now you could have, you can actually just buy food as it comes to your neighborhood. I would think to maybe contact them. I think that would be a great, I would love to connect you with them, because I know, especially because of COVID, they're hurting a little bit. And we're like, oh, we're just about to start this initiative where they're going to be helping these programs in the mayor's office of constituent services and human services by driving this food around. So if I would love to connect you, if that sounds like what you're talking about, because that is just them going to be pumping good food into these communities and hoping that people can pay for it. So does that sound like something you're mentioning or talking?
I think that's definitely worth doing, and I would definitely want to support that. I think we're lucky enough that we have a car and could potentially access grocery stores, so I don't necessarily want to deplete stock from the community members who don't necessarily have that same level of transportation access. That might be more useful for people who can pay for it but don't necessarily have transportation access. But it's something that I definitely want to support. I think on my end, it's is there any kind of organizations that take just about to expire food or just expired food and still willing to sell it or funnel some good money into supporting these systems to stop food from being wasted? I guess. Is there a way to?
So are you just trying to donate to organizations that do this work of grabbing food and giving it out for free? Is that what you're saying?
No, it's more like, how do I spend money on groceries that are just about to expire or expiring but are still good to eat? Or ugly fruit that some grocery stores wouldn't pick up.
I know Gooder, she has pop-up markets. She's selling that stuff, I think.
Okay.
Yeah.
That's
yeah.
awesome.
Yeah. It's the way now, I think. even as someone who can afford food, it's why are we putting food in the trash? It's get discounts.
Cool. That's really good to know.
Yeah.
That's awesome.
Yeah. Maybe I'll have another delivery for you this weekend.
You are so awesome. I literally gave that to 3 other people.
That's good. So much food.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah. A lot of food. Yeah.
So I think Beth, nope, not yet. But what I was going to say is the Food Recovery Network, I'll send out the link, but it's happening on Saturday. And it runs from 9 a.m. to 3:30 on Saturday.
Yeah.
Okay. Awesome.
And actually, Natasha, if you're free, I might try and recruit you to be on a panel for that.
Is it this Saturday?
This well, yeah.
What time?
10 to 10:30.
I'm right in the middle of my food recovery right then.
Okay.
I'll
Then
be at
don't
Whole
worry about it.
Foods. Yeah.
I'd rather have you doing the good work of the food recovery.
Thank you.
So I just posted the link, and for those who are going to be watching this after we've done this live event, I will make sure when I post it to Facebook that I include the link in the comments section. All right. Well, all right, everyone unmute and give Natasha a round of applause.
Thank you, Natasha.
Thank you so much.
Yeah, fun.
It's awesome.
I love talking about this stuff. Thank you.
Well, and it's so important. And to me, well, I mean, I'm sure most people are aware about drawdown. This is number 3 to do, right?
Number three. And we don't talk about it.
We don't
it's
talk
the
about
easiest
it.
thing. Yeah.
Right.
Before you buy an EV or get some solar panels, how about you just divert your food waste?
Well, and the other thing about it is, from the things that Drawdown did, this is the number one thing that every single person in this country can do.
And that's what I mean. Yeah, it's so accessible. It's the same way people come up to me and they're always like, I recycle. And it just makes them feel good. You know what I'm saying? Because we can't all afford solar panels, and we all can't afford EVs, even though, yeah, those are great things to do too, of course. But people just want to feel like there's something they can do. And as soon as they know I'm working recycle, like, I recycle, and it just makes them feel like they're being part of the solution. And so food waste is that thing. I'm always just like, we don't talk about it. And it's like the easiest thing to recycle, because before you have to find infrastructure to recycle a plastic bottle to melt it down into little little fragments and then remelt it and mold it and stuff. You can actually just put the food outside into the ground. You know, it's like food is the easiest thing to recycle, whether you're eating it or whether you're just putting it outside. Something wants it. Something's going to eat it. Yeah. So, and then you put that compost right back on the ground. It sequesters that carbon. It's just, I think it's the greatest cyclical form of recycling.
Right. So we, in DeKalb, we have a couple of elections coming up. And one of the things we're talking about is providing curbside composting. Look, I want to be very clear, DeKalb, I'm not saying we're going to do it. We're just talking about exploring it. Is that something the city of Atlanta is going to be exploring?
We're really moving more towards community-based composting right now. And personally myself, I always move more towards community-based because I think curbside is just another cart and another truck going down the street. And then you haul that stuff 70 miles outside of town, you make the compost and you haul it right back in. So it's like, I think we should be trying to create more solutions where you're creating more community-based compost. And that doesn't just have to be 3-bin systems where someone has to get out there and do manual labor. I mean, there's these new in-vessel systems that I just think waste management should be investing in. Like, I think my mind's like that far. I just think every community should have like an in-vessel composter just on the side and you come drop it off, you know, instead of investing in more trucks and more hauling and more spewing of greenhouse gases by driving it 70 miles outside of town. Let's start to handle that waste very locally because it is just food and it's 70% water. It's the easiest form of recycling. So just put it in the ground somewhere or create these little in-vessel systems or even these containerized systems. I've seen some great systems where it's just like shipping containers and neighborhoods are able to compost right there. But I personally don't advocate for curbside composting.
Okay, so unpack for us what community composting looks like. Like, tell us some examples.
Sure. So a lot of community gardens and farms have these community composting sites where it's just a 3-bin system. So we have a 7.1 food forest that the Urban Ag Department runs where they're growing, that's going to be populated with a lot of food in a couple of years. And we have a composting system there. I actually manage that system. It's a 3-bin system. And I've got 5 families that drop off their food waste. And then every week we turn it and create compost. But why that also, I used to think that was a solution, but figure that's only 5 families. What if the whole neighborhood was wanting to drop off their compost? I mean, that system can take more than like maybe 10 families a week. And so do you see what I'm saying? So I realize I want to keep it local, but I realize like those little 3-bin systems aren't the solution. So, but I mean, there are a few cities that have plenty of those. Like Philadelphia has like maybe 25 that they just created last year. I know DC has probably 50 or 60 of those, but it's never gonna handle all the food waste that there is. So I really advocate for these kind of in-vessel containerized things just attached to a neighborhood and a solar panel that runs it or something. Yeah, because it should just be handled right there. And then you just bring it out and you put it back in the ground that's growing local food. So that's what community composting is, just where people are growing food. They're also accepting food scraps from offsite and turning it and composting it. But it's so it's just small amounts of people. What if we get to a place where we really are composting everyone's food scraps? We need bigger solutions. Did that answer?
Yeah, and I'm just processing. I'm trying to think like where. So I live in unincorporated DeKalb. Like, where is the closest place from? I mean, I compost at home, so it's not an issue for me. But like, where could I tell my neighbors to take it? Right. So something.
Where you live, Beth, I think the closest place would be Wild Center's Oakhurst Garden.
Oh, yeah, that's really close. I can walk if I'm feeling motivated. I'd have to have a wagon to drag all my compost. So this has just been awesome. It feels like no one else has questions. Anybody have a question, raise your hand, or we're going to go on and finish this up. Thank you so much. We do have these, I went on and scheduled next week. We don't have a speaker yet, but I am anticipating that we will. And then on the 30th, we're going to have Jackie Eccles from the South River talk about water and environmental racism. and living on the margins. So Natasha, thank you so much for your time. We really appreciate it.
Yeah.
Thank you, Natasha. That was great.
Yeah, great. See you. See you next week, Jillian. And you too, Beth Bond. Sounds like I know you now or something. See you soon too.
All right, great.
And Michael.
Thanks, y'all.
All right. Bye, y'all. Have a good evening. Bye,
Bye-bye.
yo. Bye, Michael.